Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all of you. I, Lara Farat, on behalf of Institute of Regional Studies, invite you to this esteemed panel discussion on Afghanistan under Taliban Regional Framework for Political and Security Cooperation. I would like to begin with Tilawat.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
We had an esteemed chief guest, Ms. Chandana Gulzar Khan, but she's stuck in traffic and she'll be here in any time sooner. I would now like to request Mr. Arish Khan to please get hold of the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larib. We were supposed to have a keynote address by the chief guest, Ms. Chandana Gulzar Khan, but since she is a bit late, so we'll start with the panel discussion. And let me begin by introducing our esteemed panel today. Today we have three esteemed panelists who are joining us in person, and fourth panelist who has joined us online through Skype. So our first panelist today is Mr. Taimur Shamil. Mr. Shamil is an academic and a PhD scholar of international relations with a focus on foreign policy analysis and national security. Mr. Shamil has lectured widely on Pakistan's foreign policy and national security at prestigious civil and military institutions. His research focuses on US foreign policy, South Asia security issues, Afghanistan and Iran, and his analysis on regional and global politics appears regularly on national and international TV channels and newspapers like Al Jazeera, Dawn, Express Tribune, and various other media outlets. Thank you so much, Mr. Shamil, for joining us. Our second panelist today is Dr. Johan Hippler. He is a political scientist and peace researcher and has been country director of the FES in Pakistan since May 2019. He is a specialist on the Muslim Middle East, mostly Arab countries and Central Asian republics, including Afghanistan and Pakistan. In addition to his fellowship at the University of Duisburg, Essen, Germany, I'm sorry if I couldn't pronounce it correctly, Dr. Hippler is also a consultant working on cultural dimensions of globalization, intercultural dialogues, and violent conflict and war. Thank you so much, Dr. Hippler, for joining us. Our third esteemed panelist today is Brigadier Retired Salim Kamar Bhatt. Brigadier Salim Kamar Bhatt is a retired army officer who is experienced in international relations, defense, and warfare studies with proficiency in military and intelligence diplomacy, strategic analysis and forecast, and executive management. He is a geostrategic analyst for Pakistan State Television PTV and writes for Daily Times, The Nations, Business News Pakistan, South Asia Pulse, and South Asia Magazine. Our fourth panelist who has joined us online is Mr. Tariq Farhadi. Mr. Tariq Farhadi is the former economic advisor to the Afghanistan government under President Hamid Karzai. So the format of today's session is that each of the esteemed panelists will give an initial statement of maximum 10 minutes. And after that, we'll have a Q&A session with all four of you. The questions, I will ask the questions, and I'll also invite questions from the audience. So Mr. Shamil, we'll start with you. You can turn on your mic from there and
Thank you so much, Arish. And thank you, IRS, for this very timely and important discussion on Afghanistan specifically and Pakistan's role in the Afghan peace process. Just making this statement, I'm sure this audience is very updated and informed on the issue of Afghanistan. There wouldn't be anything new, but I think what is more important when we talk about Afghanistan is that Afghanistan is at the heart of three security complexes. the Central Asian security complex, the South Asian security complex, and the Persian Gulf security complex. When you talk about Afghanistan, we have to understand that this issue has been there for the last almost 40 years now. And the dynamics of this issue is, I would say, very complex. Afghanistan itself is a very specialized subject, I would say. Looking at Afghanistan, there are a couple of questions that we have to ask. One is that what is the reason that Afghanistan for the last 40 years has been in turmoil? And it is the way it is. Why it is the way it is? Is it because of the internal security dynamics, internal political dynamics? Is it because of the regional security complex, the regional actors? That is also one point, and this debate is there that probably the region has its influence on Afghanistan, or is it because of the international structure, the great power politics that plays out and mirrors its issues in Afghanistan? So we'll be talking about this, I'm sure, in our discussion. My point is that it is imperative and very important for Afghanistan to be politically stable first of all. Then comes the region, and then comes the international or global powers. Afghanistan has to be politically stable, and most importantly, for its neighbors. I mean, we are directly and indirectly affected by what is happening in Afghanistan. So Pakistan is the number one country which would want to have peace and stability in Afghanistan. And for that, now we have the Taliban interim government, and we expect, Pakistan probably would expect that the Taliban government would focus on primarily three things. One is that a political stability where things are more predictable, inclusive government. Inclusivity is very important. Afghanistan is a land of diverse ethnicities, people from different ethnic backgrounds. Their representation in the Afghan government or any future political setup would be very important, and Taliban have to realize this. The second thing is generally human rights. The issue of human rights, I think, is very important for the Afghan political stability in the future, and consequently for us, for the region as well. And the third thing, most important thing is security. Pakistan, and not just Pakistan, all the neighboring countries are concerned about the political situation in Afghanistan that has been getting precarious day by day. So Pakistan and the regional countries would want Afghanistan to be stable in the security sphere, and keeping a check on these non-state actors, terrorist organizations like TTP, ETIM, Jamatul Ahrar, Hezbollah, and all these organizations. So these are the main concerns for Pakistan. Looking at the subsystemic level, systemic level, these are the issues that are there in Afghanistan. And I hope that political stability comes to Afghanistan sooner, and we see a peace and prosperity, because whatever we talk about the regional integration, it is not possible unless we have stable, politically stable Afghanistan. Thank you.
Amil, we now also have the chief guest today, Ms. Shandana Gulzar Khan. Ms. Shandana Gulzar Khan, just let me briefly introduce her, is a member of the National Assembly of Pakistan and has served as the Parliamentary Secretary for Commerce. She was elected as the chairperson of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians, a network of women members of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's Parliament and Legislatures, for a 3-year term in 2019. She is also a member of National Assembly's Standing Committees on Privatization, Planning, Development and Reform, and Industries and Production, and is also a member of the National Assembly's Special Committee on Agricultural Products. Ms. Khan, would you like to give your address now, or would you like to listen to the other two panelists first, and three panelists first, and then after that, would you like to give your keynote address? Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you so much. So with that, with the permission of the chief guest, I would now invite Dr. Hippler to please give his introductory statement, a maximum 10 minutes, sir.
Yes, very well. It is a big pleasure being here and having a discussion like this with so eminent guests and participants as well. Let me just start from the backside of the thing. You know, the topic is the regional framework. And I think the regional framework is probably, when we take the accounts of the last 40 years, when we have the experiences of the last 40 years into account, probably less relevant than the local, the Afghani framework. That's probably also what you had in mind. What I'm trying to say is, why do we have this conflict in Afghanistan for so many years? The truth is that for probably 140 years, 150 years, there was no, thank you so much, there was no balance between society and state. We have had situations since the late 19th century and then repeating after the First World War and then up to the PDPA's rule and then again after the US intervention. We had several attempts to turn Afghanistan into a nation state in the sense that the government would rule the country. But big parts of society have resisted that for very different reasons, which we can't go into. So there was a strong tension between society being fragmented and very diverse on the one hand, and once in a while, upcoming governments who just thought they could rule the country like they could rule Denmark or Sweden, which they couldn't. And this tension is the basic underlying factor for conflict, which did not just start 40 years ago, but probably at the end of the 19th century. And I think that this kind of problem will have to be addressed, and I'm getting back to that in a few seconds. But if this is true, then interventions by outsiders, may they be British in history, may they be Soviet Union, may they be Saudi or Pakistani or American or European, will not necessarily be very helpful. Because generally the outside forces have not been paying attention to these problems of rebalancing society and state very much. Obviously, they have been paying attention to their self-interest very much. And they very often have been paying attention to the self-interest in a narrow, security-oriented way, not paying attention very much to the needs of the Afghans and to the conditions of the local population. So my point here is, and I think it's pretty close to what Tamir said, I really think the key priority should not be to build beautiful diplomatic frameworks around the problem, but the Afghans have to deal with their own problems first, meaning they have to be able and willing and competent to build a system of statehood, a system of governments, which is responsive to their own society and which also would allow the state to be a state and not just a bunch of people presiding about a little bit chaotic situation. Now, having said that, my next step in these few minutes is looking at the Taliban in this context. The Taliban have a kind of double face in this context. On the one hand, the Taliban have been a force resisting state building under specific context. They obviously have developed out of former Mujahideen things, were very unhappy with Mujahideen performance and governments, resisted that. And obviously they resisted foreign intervention, they resisted American, international, European, whatever, military presence and political meddling in the affairs. So historically, and also to some degree historically, ideologically, they are not exactly state builders. They are basically expression of parts of society to resist foreign dominated, but also some internal state building, which is legitimate, but it makes life a little bit more difficult if you really think state building is now the key thing. At the same time, and that's what I mean with the double face, when the Afghan government collapsed. They were never conquered. They just disappeared, like in northern Iraq in 2015, the Iraqi government didn't lose the battle against Daesh, against the Islamic State. The Iraqi state just evaporated in a few weeks. And the similar thing happened here. So now the Taliban obviously are in power because of the lack of any alternative. There isn't any power alternative. So they are now, besides being the anti-state kind of ideological part of society, they are also now in power and have to build a state, which is a difficult, contradictory thing to do, that people who are skeptical of centralized statehood now are having the job to build it. Okay. The third step in this kind of argument is that the Taliban are not a united, homogeneous organization, right? The Taliban have been at least split in 3 or 4 different tendencies. I'm not going into details because there are many experts here. I don't want to bore you, but you had people around the Quetta Shura, you had people about the Shura of the North, you had all other kinds of things, and then you had the Mashhad office of the Taliban, which probably, my guess is, represented about maybe 20% of the Taliban, being financed by, interestingly, Iran. Yeah, okay. And these 3 or 4 different broad trends or wings of the Taliban were split internally to a degree which is mind-boggling. Some of these trends had 200, 300, 400 components, which didn't love each other very much, but they cooperated because it seemed to be practical and useful, for, again, reasons which I don't have the time to go into. But my point here is that the Taliban, as a overall thing, don't exist. They are a coalition of coalitions which now are forced to cooperate, even if many of them hate each other quite a bit, and with good reason, I have to confess. Okay, now, and this kind of coalition now is supposed to rule Afghanistan. And they have to. There's no other option. Who else is there? There's nothing else. International meddling by Western forces, by Pakistan, by Saudi, by Russia, by China will make it worse and not better. So now this is the situation. Well, the point that I'm raising these things to come to the end, because the 10 minutes are approaching their deserved end. The reason I'm mentioning is that when we talk about stability in Afghanistan, we have 2 or 3 key problems to solve. First, the internal stability of the Taliban themselves. If the Taliban will get at each other's throat, which is still quite likely in the next 2 years, stability will be more difficult to achieve. Secondly, if we hope, pray, pretend that there will be internal minimum of unity, then the question is, what is their willingness and competence to build a common state? That isn't quite sure. I don't think at this point they know themselves. I think there are lots of internal antagonisms and skepticisms. Some want to push ahead. The former people from the Northern Shura, they are very much into state building, like, even dictatorship building. Some groups from the Quetta Shura think that's a crazy idea and it would never work and we don't even want that. So that is not sure. We don't know their willingness of creating a state, and we don't know the competence of creating a state because they are not used to it. When they were ruling the country in 1996 to 2001, it was not a state, come on, it was a joke of a state. Some old guy with a beard sitting on some box full of money, writing little papers to be transported by a motorcycle to a different country, handing over a bag of Afghanis, rupees, dollars, whatever. That's not a state. That was a private thing pretending. And I think they are more advanced today. I'm pretty sure it's not that same repetition, but we still just don't know what the competence and willing of state building is. Okay, I could go on, but I don't. My point here is, before we are trying to build beautiful diplomatic frameworks around the country, which doesn't hurt probably, we really should focus more on the internal dynamics of Afghanistan and on the internal dynamics of the Taliban themselves. Without Afghanistan sorting out its own mess, which has created very much by itself, with the assistance of so many foreign actors, without these people sorting out their own mess, any outside trying to help will not work at all. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hippler. Our topic for today's discussion was regional framework for political and security cooperation, but the first two speakers have talked about the internal political dynamics of Afghanistan, and I think rightly so, because if we won't have internal political stability in Afghanistan, it wouldn't be easy for regional cooperation to establish in the region over Afghanistan. With that, sir, Brigadier Butt, I would now request you to please give your initial 10-minute statement.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. In about 5 minutes, I'll just read out my opening statement that will surely raise certain questions, and I would love to take that on during discussion. In order to be coherent and save time, I would just read out my statement. Afghanistan under Taliban control is a reality that has come around after 20 years long conflict, which saw United States and its allies exiting Afghanistan without achievement of their declared and some undeclared objectives. Nevertheless, Afghan Taliban interim government is presently struggling to find recognition on the one hand and economic viability on the other hand. US and allies seem determined to keep Afghanistan fund frozen, lest some humanitarian help as a result of UN Security Council resolution, as long as Taliban do not fulfill the demands with respect to all-inclusive government, dissociation from all proscribed terrorist organization, education, human rights, women's rights, children's rights, etc. So these are the demands that are expected to be responded by the Taliban, which are not yet showing any progress. Pakistan has been working strenuously, as we all know, to get Afghanistan all possible diplomatic and economic assistance through multiple diplomatic hurdles all over the world, including OIC Special Summit, which was just held. However, other than government of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan that announced $265 billion by Saudi US dollars and $30 million US dollars by Pakistan, despite serious economic crisis at home, no other country, Islamic country, has committed anything. And they have a host of reasons for not doing that. I hope we all know that, and those who don't, please do ask. Pakistan still remains the loudest voice seeking international community help to avoid human catastrophe in Afghanistan. It was hoped that China and Russia would take the lead role in mapping out a regional framework to bring around peace and stability in war-ravaged Afghanistan. Nevertheless, so far, both the intent and actions remain too sluggish to be optimistically felt by Afghanistan and by the region. The Central Asian Republic's security fragility and Russia's predisposition to reassert in former sphere of influence has been amply demonstrated by current deployment of CSTO troops to quell mass public protest and allegedly foreign-sponsored unrest in Kazakhstan, which may have linkages with the situation in Afghanistan, as well as the inconclusive talks between US and Russia in Geneva that we just witnessed. As the whole region is badly affected by the turmoil in Afghanistan, in my view, a meaningful response has to be regional. And for that, in my view, Shanghai Cooperation Organization with China, Russia, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, India, and Iran as full members, and Afghanistan itself, Belarus, Mongolia with observer status, including 6 dialogue partners that include Azerbaijan, Cambodia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Turkey, shines the brightest ray of hope for Afghanistan. As we all know, SCO is an Eurasian political, economic, and security alliance. It is the world's largest regional organization in geographic scope and population, covering 3/5 of the Eurasian continent, 40% of the world population, and more than 20% of the global GDP. In my view, China needs to undertake the lead role under SCO mandate to come up with a much desired political, economic, and security framework for Afghanistan before it is too little, too late. Nevertheless, much depends on the interim Afghan government to create conducive environment for that thing to happen. Pakistan has endured a lot of diplomatic, security, and economic coercion beside media trial for allegedly abetting Afghan Taliban. Pakistan had the natural optimism that after withdrawal of US and coalition forces from Afghanistan, Indian and other hostile proxies who remained busy in subversion and sabotage activities in Pakistan as a part of hybrid war would cease. However, so far Taliban have not been able to adequately prevail upon proscribed terrorist organizations like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and other terrorist organizations who are the spoilers of peace in Pakistan, both Pakistan and Afghanistan, like BLA, BRA, and BLP, etc. This is as disappointing for Pakistan as it is for United States and allies due to non-committal response from Afghan Taliban interim setup with respect to demands regarding Al-Qaeda, ISK, and Daesh. And Afghan would have a host of reasons that we can discuss why are they not capable of doing that so far. Pakistan has quite generously kept its doors open to help people of Afghanistan, and therefore food, medicine, and other essential supplies are kept intact despite some undesirable incidents of shooting on Pakistan's troops and demolishing of security fences on the Pakistan-Afghanistan international border near Nangarhar and Nimroz. Pakistan remains committed to settle it through diplomatic channel for greater good of regional peace while avoiding use of force so far. However, it is hoped that despite visible fissures in Taliban ranks and weak writ, Afghan interim government will not allow spoilers of peace in Afghanistan to gag Pakistan for continued help to Afghan people and interim setup. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brigadier Bhatt. Yeah, we agree with you that Pakistan's contribution to Afghanistan's stability has remained underappreciated over the years, and more importantly, in the current given situation. With that, now I would like to invite our fourth panelist today to give his opening statement of maximum 10 minutes, Mr. Tariq Farhadi, who is a former economic advisor to the Afghan government under President Hamid Karzai. Thank you so much for joining us online, sir. Over to you.
Greetings. It's a pleasure being with you this morning. I am very happy to join all my colleagues here. And as I do always when I get into a meeting like this, I say that I don't agree with everything that has been said here or read here, and then I go on. So basically what I want to do is to discuss the security aspect and desired framework for tackling terrorism. First reaction, I disagree the request that was made here that China should come up with a framework for Afghanistan. No, thank you. Anyways, there is a reality that there are terrorist elements in the region. This has been in the making for the past 40 years because the region has been a focus of power politics between superpowers, but the fighting has been done on the ground in Afghanistan and to some extent in Pakistan. I do recognize that Pakistan also has suffered in the past 20 years in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa area and those areas losses on the side of the population and the side of the army. All of that was not well managed by the superpowers and perhaps by the Pakistani authorities as well. So that's one point. But beyond that, we need to reach at a point where we can find a peaceful coexistence for the region, for the country. Um, um, the difficulty of relations between Pakistan and India has been a major sore point, I would say, in what goes on here. I remind you that the Prime Minister of Pakistan has ordered the Indian wheat to get to Afghanistan 4 months ago, and the government of Pakistan has not been able to follow the orders of its Prime Minister to allow the wheat into Afghanistan. And now there is talk of sending the wheat through Chabahar in Iran, which will be done, but it's not logical. So all of this region needs to reach some sort of a security agreement. But before the security agreement, we have to reach peace. We have to decide that for the region, what's most important is poverty reduction. What is haunting our populations, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Pakistan, and whether it is in India, it's poverty, and Iran as well. So our leaders have to focus more on how to take this from the economic standpoint. I am optimistic that the new national security policy of Pakistan tilts from geostrategic to geoeconomic, because it's the economic relaxation of the situation where markets can work and people can work and people can create wealth for themselves at any level that will save the region. The governments, in each case, are weak to save the region. I just gave you an example of a prime minister who gave an order and then the government has not applied the order for 4 months. In Afghanistan, it's the same. It's a new situation. A new state is taking formation. There is a state in Afghanistan. Taliban are taking over a state and they are making the changes that they want to make. They see themselves as the victors of this war. Even after the Soviet occupation, there was a state in Afghanistan. What I call a state is an administrative system. When you go there, you have the governorates, you have the revenue collection facilities. These things have existed. The plumbing has existed. If the revenue collection was not a stream inside the planning, that's a different story. But the Taliban have arrived basically at a situation where there is an administrative state. There is no stream inside the administrative state. There is no money. There is no resource. Yes, what has gone away is the army. But I think right now the Taliban, the first task of the Taliban is to keep the security that we have, the relative security that we have in Afghanistan. That's important. And it's important for the neighbors of Afghanistan. And the three neighbors, in this case, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran, should come up with a security framework after relations are better on all sides. I will give you an example. On the Durand Line issue, China has frankly nothing to say, historically or even now. So that's why this call shocked me a little bit, to give everything on a platter to China. No. So the security of the region, I was going to talk about three topics. Yes, the economic development aspect. Yes, the economic development can be done through trade, basically. All countries have an interest in trading with each other. I'm talking here about India, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan. Afghanistan is an exporter of fruits. Its fruits are much in demand in India. In the first months of the Taliban, we had pomegranate, which rotted at the Spin Boldak border. It couldn't really transit towards the markets in Pakistan. That was a waste. That was a waste for our farmers. If there are buyers in Pakistan, or if there are buyers in India for our fruits, access should be given. If anybody wants to tax the fruits, they can. for their state, but the market and the customers should be able to find the fruits, and the people who produce the fruits should be able to sell the fruits. This will make that everyone makes money from this trade, and the consumer is happy. Political short-sighted decision makings that change every day are not healthy, neither for Pakistan, neither for Afghanistan, neither for India. In that extent, trade has worked a little bit smoother between Afghanistan and Iran. Trade also is a necessary fact for Pakistan, which needs access to the Central Asian markets, which are landlocked, more and more landlocked, even after the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan. The role of Russia is becoming more important in Central Asia. But for foodstuffs that Pakistan can export to Central Asia, and the population, the consumers are still there. And for that reason, Pakistan needs good relation with the government in Afghanistan, Taliban, and to reduce tensions on any matter that might be, in order to have access to the Central Asian markets. It has been a desire for Pakistan for a long time. The TAPI project, for an example, which is supposed to export gas from Turkmenistan to Pakistan, India, TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. We have never seen an Indian delegation in Pakistan or in Kabul discussing this. So it's a dream project, unless all the countries really come to the reality that geostrategic is not the way to go, but geoeconomic is the way to go. I think Pakistan is coming to this conclusion, so I'm happy about this. So. And the final point that I wanted to make is that our problems are common, especially Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan have a water problem in the decades to come. This has to be done, taken care of peacefully, existing international agreements. And we have a global warming problem, which doesn't really know borders. And this has to be dealt with also in a way that we can lobby together the world bodies to give us enough credits to deal with the global warming problem. In Afghanistan, it's real. In Pakistan also, to some extent, we have melting of our mountains. So we have floods occasionally, and we also have drought in northwestern Afghanistan, which causes entire swaths of population to leave their land, and this creates migration. Some of this migration can be absorbed inside Afghanistan, but if the security is not good inside Afghanistan and poverty is acute, then people will seek to leave to Iran, in most cases from northwestern Afghanistan, but also they leave to Pakistan. So it becomes a problem for everybody. So all of these problems can be dealt with, but in a level-headed manner, and taking on board any kind of international treaties that exist as a model to solve them. That's all. Thank you.
So much, Mr. Farhadi. Yes, we agree with you that we need to prioritize economic and trade relations for greater cooperation in the region. With that, now I would request Ms. Shandana Gulzar Khan to please enlighten us with her remarks.
Just me, or is the air conditioning turned on?
It's getting a bit cold here.
Yeah,
I can also feel it.
That's fine if you want to freeze your guests, no problem. But we are just so thank you so much for that. There's a couple of things I have in mind. I don't want to add on to what my fellow panelists have already said, but there's a funny French saying which I'll translate in English, but it's plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more there is change, the more it is the same. Where Afghanistan is concerned, for the last 40 plus years, I've yet to see stability in any shape or form whatsoever. By way of background, I'm a trade lawyer. I have been working in a dual capacity for Pakistan's government as a government negotiator on trade at the WTO in Geneva for quite a long time. And trade and development is what I do. I wind up in the National Assembly of Pakistan and find myself doing a couple of things. Agriculture, Pak-Afghan parliamentary group when there was an Afghan parliament, and as well as now I'm working on ex-FATA issues. In terms of background, I am a Pashtun. I'm Pashtun from KPK. I come from a fairly traditional / conservative area, but I've been very lucky. I was blessed with a very strong man for a father, and he made sure that my life would be to the extent possible according to my wishes. So there's a lot that I'm going to say now, which is very personal. This is not the view of the National Assembly or the Parliamentary Friendship Group. It comes from me, a person who sees her sisters in distress across the border. When I said what I said just now about, the more you have changed, the more it is the same, the discussion has come back full circle to issues of importance, at least to me, such as the Durand Line, as well as women's issues in Afghanistan. I come from a village, my home is still in my village. And a long time ago, my father was the one who helped me divest my burqa because frankly, I don't like it. And I'd only wear it if I wanted to wear it. And I'm not convinced that Islam advocates a parda which is oppressive. But again, there are dozens of definitions of parda out there. And far be from it for me to decide what is parda for each woman. And perhaps that's what I don't like about certain strains of thought. A woman is independent if she doesn't cover her head, or a woman is Islamic if she covers her head. That is not for men to decide, any man. As a Muslim woman, I'm fully capable of reading the Quran and understanding what it says to me, which is what leads me to the center of the problem that we find ourselves today. Why are the Taliban being vilified? Why are the Taliban being seen as the evil oppressors? I'm not pro-Taliban, but I'm neither anti-Taliban. There was a very interesting television show that I participated in nearly 5 months ago. And I found it extremely hilarious that an analyst was saying to me again and again, "Madam, don't you agree the Taliban are a different breed?" And I felt like asking a different breed of what? But nonetheless, I said, "Sir, I'm a Pakistani parliamentarian and I've taken an oath on the Constitution of Pakistan. So I find it hard to give any descriptive idea of the change in Taliban that you are obviously aware of and I am not." The Taliban have a creed. They have a particular view of Islam, which is mixed heavily with Pashtunwali, with tribalism. Some might even go so far as to call them, some people call it tafkiri and some say tafriki, God knows, whichever pronunciation you pronounce, but they have their own version of Islam. So am I to dispute their version of Islam? Not my mandate, yet anyways. Is it anybody's mandate? No. But I can talk about women's right to development as is enshrined in our faith that we share with them. Now, we can, of course, split hairs and talk about Deobandis and Salafis and Wahhabis, but that is not the issue here. The issue is that this is a power struggle which has continued for the last 40, 42 years. For those of you who may have read Ahmed Rashid's book on Afghanistan, he tells you what his Afghan at the time counterparts told him, that it's simply giving in to male dominance that forms the basis of this cultural issue. So to blame it on Islam is very convenient. But let's be truthful about it if we have the guts to be truthful. That's one part of the problem. The other thing, the discussion that we're having today, and you pardon me, Ambassador Saab, if you'll allow me, I'm a lawyer at heart, so I split everything. I even had a mini argument with Allah, if Allah listens to me, a few days ago. This is completely not related to the topic at all, but if you've read the last ayat of Surah Baqarah, starts with Amana Rasulo. On no burden, on no human does God place a burden larger than he can bear. And being the lawyer that I am, I had a midnight discussion with God if he was 100% sure about that. And maybe like all other legal documents, we should have a codicil or a but or an exception or proviso. What is a regional framework for political and security cooperation? What do you even mean by a regional framework? We have destroyed a piece of earth for the last 45 years. And now that they have peace through violence, how are we going to impose that framework on them? We've let down the Afghans. We've destroyed Afghanistan. When I say we, the entire world has destroyed Afghanistan. I had the good luck to meet with the German ambassador this year, August, in Uganda. I was there for a separate issue. And he told me something very interesting. He said, as early